Okay, folks. John Reed. I got Dick Hirsch here. Dick, what's going on?
Not much. Just the last day of the TechEd. So I'm thinking about the past, thinking about the last few days and reflecting. And that's why it's good that we have this chat. It's not on a Friday. I mean, usually we have this
I know,
on Friday.
man.
I mean, but it's a Thursday. That's cool.
What happened, Dick?
Yeah, well, I mean, things change. I mean, arrived a day early, leave a day early. That's
okay.
it.
Yeah, this is our traditional SAP TechEd in review, and we're not in a quiet room, folks, so hopefully it ends up being good enough. We got some noise behind us, but we do have a little table in the corner, so let's see what we make sense of the week here. Dick, you always come into the week with some burning questions. What were those, and what progress did you make?
Well, I mean, even before the event had happened, I had looked at some topics, and most of it, as usual, revolved around the HANA Cloud Platform, HCP. And I was curious to see how they were going to position it, curious to get details on the platform. In particular, I was looking at some information regarding Cloud Foundry and also regarding Yaz. Yaz, let me take a step back. Yaz is some new business services which originate from Hybris, but I'm sure we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. So those are the main areas I was looking at.
And what kinds of things did you learn? I mean, we had two keynotes. We had one from Steve Lurkus, one from Bernd Leichhardt. They weren't terribly long. Steve's did run over a bit, but they weren't
45 minutes or something.
Yeah, they weren't
crazy.
Epic keynotes.
Well,
in terms of announcements and stuff.
There were some. I mean, there were some announcements which were interesting. I mean, for me, the one announcement which I had expected was regarding the vehicle network from SAP. And that's totally amazing stuff, and that more or less didn't receive the attention as I would have hoped, because it's a pretty revolutionary idea. But I mean, what they gave, at least in terms of Steve's keynote, you got a really good impression that SAP is partnering with these very innovative startups. And I think that's a little bit of a change, because in the past, you might see large companies coming in, talking about, I mean, there's more customer stories, more for like Sapphire, but here you really see these are small startups that SAP is partnering with to really push their innovation forward. And it's nice to see on stage.
Right. So we had Steve on Monday night, and then we had Bernd on Tuesday. That was it for the keynotes, and so then you went into your meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday. What kinds of stuff did you learn about your topics?
Well, I mean, the one thing that I had some TechEd Live interviews with Björn Kirke and a gentleman, Dennis Ferre von Hybris. So I wanted to prepare myself. So I went and talked to these individuals. And I mean, the one thing that I really want to emphasize is that I had a detailed conversation with the guys from Hybris. Fascinating. I mean, the guys are really quick, and they have really innovative ideas. What's going to be interesting is to see how their ideas really can fit into the SAP context. Because although SAP is moving fast regarding Agile and things like that, the people from Hybris and this one platform, Yaz, are even a step farther. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be interesting.
And in terms of how to frame that discussion, I think if you're watching from afar, you might have picked up on that SAP was really emphasizing digital change. So that was a major theme of the keynotes, right? Essentially, companies are being sort of quote unquote disrupted by digital, but they're also there's new opportunities being created by that as well for those that can quote unquote seize the day. And of course, SAP wants to position itself as the company that can help its customers do that. There wasn't as much S/4HANA talk on the main stage.
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting, because it was, if you take a look at the difference between Sapphire, where S4 was center.
Yeah.
Here, it was HCP. And you saw that in both keynotes. And if you look at the sessions as well, HCP has really come of age. And it's been sort of a long road. But now it's front and center. And that's great, because it's an important decision that SAP has to do just to really push it to developers, and I think they're working on that.
And just to be clear, SAP did mention and does envision S/4HANA as the so-called digital core, right? No. And so that's how they're positioning it, which I think makes some sense from positioning, though I have some problems with it I could get into in a sec. But we did talk with SAP about this in various meetings, and we end up at these informal receptions and stuff in bars where we can pester these folks and get some stuff. And it turns out that the way they're looking at the fall season is to sort of different events will kind of balance the message. So they're not looking at it like one event carries the day. So they're looking much more to Barcelona, I think, for S4, which is getting closer to the next release they're planning.
The 1511 release of S4 it's not November, so it's not out there yet. But in Barcelona, I think it'll get a much better emphasis because it is the core.
Right.
I mean, and if you look at SAP, that's really the history of SAP, and the knowledge is in there. So the question is, how do you use that in digital transformation?
Right. So I think that raises some interesting questions. I was pursuing some questions around S/4HANA as a digital core because, so in the analyst community, there's an interesting debate going on around this, and most analysts I talk to who are into digital stuff and they're generally into like fast deployments, business-driven software decisions.
Right.
Yeah. They talk a lot about OpEx and stuff, which essentially means you don't have to dig for capital budgets for your projects and, that kind of thing. And a lot of these analysts tend to view ERP as sort of a legacy situation that you don't really spend a lot of time thinking about.
Don't change it. Let it.
Just let it sit and don't deal with it. Maybe don't even upgrade it for a couple of years if you don't need to. Maybe even get third-party maintenance on that thing and focus on your external customer-facing deployments that are probably cloud, blah, blah, blah. And SAP, of course, takes a very different tack. They don't, if you sit on a very old release of SAP, that's not good for business for a variety of reasons. So SAP's taken the case that that doesn't make sense and that you need a modern ERP core.
Right.
And they don't even use the word ERP really, but the point is
it's now enterprise management or something.
Yeah, enterprise management is sort of at the middle of it, but they want you to be able to essentially expose that data as services, integrate it with your external apps. And by the way, it's running on a real-time database now, and so you can do, operational analytics on it. I have a lot of sympathy with SAP's view on that. I actually think it's a smarter way of doing it than the analysts think. And I've talked with enough customers now that do real time on ERP to be convinced that it's a much better way to go. But having said that, I do think it's wildly unrealistic for SAP to think that the customers, for example, on Enhance a Pack 4, if they want to do a digital initiative, are going to go through a series of upgrades and enhancement pack patches, move to Business Suite on HANA.
Right. And it's still a painful process. They're releasing tools now, and that's one thing that I think you'll see in Barcelona. Is that the tool set is getting a lot better to help customers on this journey. But if you take a look at HCP, they're positioning it for both. I mean, because they don't want to lose the opportunity that customers that have these older releases, they can also be innovative. But the question is, how do you position S4 to provide different use cases? Right,
exactly. And so SAP does want to help companies do things now, but I think sometimes they get caught up a little bit in, well, you've got to be on this modern S4 to do. And I think that's a little bit of a problem that SAP still has to figure out. And the other thing I was looking into was there's this question. I watched a webinar from a SAP partner, and I'm not going to name them.
No names.
I'm not going to name them
because remain anonymous.
They were wrong. But what they were doing is they were basically saying that S4HANA was going to be a component-based sort of thing. And so, in other words, once you make the move to Business Suite on HANA, which can be challenging, especially if you have like a lot of customized, that once you move there, from there, you can take a component-based approach to S4 where, okay, if you want simple finance, you can do that. And if you later on, if you want to do some Fiori, you can do that, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And very clearly at this TechEd, I've figured out that that's not going to be the case. They are going to continue to offer
simple finance
for a while. For a while as a separate thing you can start with. But bottom line is there's too many dependencies that they're planning between, which does make some sense. But I think that is interesting because it is going to make customers think a little bit about, well, I'm making kind of a new decision. And that's an interesting and risky strategy, in my opinion, for SAP, because once you're saying, this is an all new thing.
Then people can look look to other vendors as well. So it's a problem.
It's bold.
Right.
If their product is great, maybe it will work out great for them. But I think it is interesting that they're not doing it in such a way where it's like, well, yeah, I could just dabble in this, and because the cloud is all about kind of picking one thing and then moving on to the next one thing.
Yeah.
And S4 is not going to be like that. S4 is going to be more like, at least the way they're talking about it now, is this is it.
Right. But I mean, if you're a customer and you come to this decision, I mean, you have to think of the whole path.
Yeah.
Which means that you got to think of migration. Doesn't matter whether you go to S4 or some other platform. You're probably gonna have to migrate.
You're still gonna have to migrate, right?
So some things remain the same. It's just like you said. Can SAP position S4 as being more innovative as the other competitors?
Yeah. Which is a story to watch. I think it's going to be very interesting to find out.
Definitely.
So on the HANA Cloud Platform side, were you able to tie these pieces together, like the hybrid stuff you're looking at and the HCP and the S4? Do they tie together in one story?
I mean, it is. I mean, I think what's important is to realize that SAP is understanding that just having a platform by itself, even when the technology is really good, isn't enough. They have to look a little bit higher in terms of the stack. And stack, I don't mean a technology stack. I mean in terms of the domain knowledge that SAP has. And the question is, how do you provide developers this information in a manner they can use? And that's why I think the Hybris and their YAS platform is so interesting, because they have business services. Business services they have right now, commerce business services. And that is a new approach for SAP in that they look more, it's not just identity service or a persistent service. This is a commerce service or a loyalty service. And that's the difference.
Right. And will those be offered through HCP as far as you know?
They're going to be together. I mean, if you look at all the strategy diagrams, they're always part of the HCP story. In terms of the technology below it, the stuff from YAS is based on Cloud Foundry. SAP is moving there. So it's not all together in one unit, but that's for developers. It really doesn't matter because they're just APIs which you can use. But that's a good story. And what's interesting as well is that if you look at SAP, one of the new buzzwords is microservice. And you saw that during Bernd's keynote.
Right, yeah, he mentioned as well, yeah.
And that's sort of a new approach to develop software. And it's more than just having an API that's REST-based. There's a whole DevOps story which is behind it. I mean, if you take a look at microservices, and what makes it so interesting is that in the old world, you had a monolithic application, and on top of that, you had APIs.
Right.
In microservice environment, it's different. You have these small services on top of it. You build the application, okay? And with that, there's a whole other DevOps story, which would be really curious to see if SAP can use that.